Hey guys, Gene here, and we're going to give you the skinny on Detroit lockers and Jeeps. Yeehaw!
2000 Jeep Wrangler TJ, 4-liter, automatic. I've owned it about a year. I bought it last year from somebody in New Jersey. It was very clean, low miles, no rust, which is really what I was looking for. And when I first got it, it had 307 gears, open diffs front and rear, Dana 30 front, Dana 35 rear. It had 32-inch motors on it and a 2-inch lift. And when I first got it, I was thrilled. It was perfect. It's all I wanted to do. It went off-road. I had good fun with it. It climbed some things that I was amazed at. But like most people, you start jeeping with a group of friends or a club, and you quickly find out the shortcomings of 32-inch tires and really no lift, and 307 gears and open diffs. So it started first with the, I put a 4-inch lift on it. I put 35-inch motors on it. It came with these wheels. Gave me more ground clearance. It certainly gave me better traction. It looked better, but the shortcomings of open diffs with big tires and 307 gears were apparent. The vehicle was a dog on the highway. I had to use low range all the time off-road, and as you can imagine, the traction wasn't the greatest. I'm not a big fan of mud. I mean, I'll go through it if I have to, but I'm not crazy about it. I actually enjoy trails better and rock climbing. So that became very quickly evident that I needed to do something. And I read a lot on the internet, the pros and cons of excuse me, Dana 35 rear versus a Dana 44, the pros and cons of upgrading the axle shafts, the pros and cons of different rear end ratios, and the biggie, what type of locker do you put in? Do you put in a limited slip device? Do you put in a Detroit locker? Do you put in a selectable locker like a ARB or an electric locker? And I thought about this long and hard. And quite honestly, for me, I really wasn't excited about the thought of paying about $2,000 for 2 lockers, plus gears, plus new axle shafts, and then installing it. I completely ruled out the idea of doing it to a Dana 35 rear. They're marginal. Dana 30 front, well, I wanted to find a Dana 44 front, but they're tough to find without spending a ton of money. And I figured if I upgraded chromoly shafts in the front with the automatic, I'd probably be less likely to break something than a guy with a manual transmission if driven carefully. So what I did was I found a Dana 44 rear, and I selected Detroit lockers front and rear. I put 33 spline G2 axles in the rear, and I stayed with the 27 spline 10 factory chromoly axles in the front. Yeah, you can go 30 spline in the front chromoly, but you got to remember, ring and pinion on a Dana 30, they're not very big. Then that becomes the part that breaks. So I'd rather break an axle shaft and get home than break a ring and pinion gear set. Now in the rear, I did go with a Dana 44, like I said. I decided to go with 456 gears and Detroit lockers front and rear. And I did that over the winter. I'm a mechanic by trade. And it wasn't a hard install. I bought the Motive Gear ring and pinion set and the Motive Gear install set front and rear. Took my time. I built up the Dana 44 first, like I said, with 33 spline axles. Then I did the Dana 30 in the front, got it all back together, and I've been driving it now since January. I can tell you a lot of the stories you hear online about how terrible a Detroit locker is in the front or in the rear on the street. A lot of that is nonsense. All right, very simple. Detroit locker in the front When you're not in four-wheel drive, you'll never know it's there. It doesn't affect your steering, doesn't make it hard to steer. It doesn't click, clang, or bang. You don't hear any ratcheting. That's because it's freewheeling. It's not under load, so you don't really know it's there. Now, when you do put it in four-wheel drive, high or low range, it doesn't matter, you absolutely will notice that there's a locker in the front, and it is a little difficult to steer. You'll feel it. But since we're off-road, I can live with that. As far as the rear, the locker in the rear, there's very little difference on the street. Here's what you will notice. When you're making tight turns, like in a parking lot or around an intersection, you will hear a very faint clicking as the dogs release when you make the turn, but it's not that loud. In other words, if I didn't tell you what was going on, you might not even notice it. It's very faint. If you make a sharp turn on pavement and you're putting any load on the rear end with the gas pedal, the tires do scuff. It depends on how much throttle you're using and how tight a turn. But does it keep you from making the turn? No, definitely not. It can get a little interesting in the snow. You got to remember that both rear wheels are going to turn no matter what, but it still works. Off-road, it's unbelievable. When you lock it in four-wheel drive, everything is driving. You will not believe the difference compared to open diffs. The one downside to having lockers front or rear, mainly in the rear, is when you go from drive to reverse, there is more driveline play. So you will hear a banging more than you did before when you go from reverse, neutral, drive, neutral, back to reverse. It's more in low range because then you're multiplying the amount of play through the transfer case. It's not going to break anything, not going to hurt anything, but you definitely will notice. In fact, first time you get in, you're going to be like, what did I forget to tighten? But that's normal, doesn't make a difference. I am using the Royal Purple synthetic gear lube, 75-140. I think that helps minimize that banging. It's not a metallic bang, it makes you think you got a worn U-joint, but you can live with it. But, like I said, for the advantages, when you go off-road, you will not believe the difference. And being that a Detroit locker is just about half the price of a selectable locker, in my opinion, that's the way to go. At least it was for me. I set up the rears myself and the front diff myself. I did put the Poison Spider bombshell diff cover, front and rear. They're really meaty and heavy. I don't know if this is going to show up very well. I put the outer axle tube seals. I'm not going to give you a full review of everything I've done else on the Jeep. We're talking about the lockers right now. I did put a slip yoke eliminator kit in the rear with a Woods drive shaft, which is kind of pretty much what you need, especially when you lift them. Don't know how well this picture is going to come out, but we'll try to show you. Poison Spider, adjustable upper control arms in the rear to get the pinion angle correct. I've got some skid plates. We're not going to talk about those now. That's for another time. But anyway, basically in my review, Detroit lockers, all the horror stories that you're going to hear people say about how you can't steer, you can't turn, the tires are going to scuff off, they'll chatter, you'll drive off the road because you can't steer. It's all nonsense. Now, like I said, in snow, you definitely notice it. The vehicle, because both rear wheels are always going to drive, does tend to slide sideways a little bit, either in the snow or off-road, especially if you get on a hill and both rear wheels spin, you're going to go sideways a little bit. Be prepared for it, but like I said, in my opinion, for the price of selectable lockers, which in a perfect world probably be the way to go, but remember, with an ARB, you're going to have onboard air. With an electric locker, you're going to have wiring, and these things, people have had problems with them. So, for me, I'm glad I did the Detroit lockers. Most of what you hear is horror stories. Don't believe it. If you're thinking about doing it and you want to save some money, you don't like the price of the selectable lockers, go for it. You're not going to be unhappy. I actually have 2 friends that are considering doing the same on theirs. So hope this helps somebody, and we'll see you in the next video.